Chris with Coldbreak here. Today we had GRCC students, the Grand Rapids Community College. They've got a brewing program, and so one of their classes is just dedicated to field work, and they get to tour different breweries in the area. And we're typically on their list for the season, for the semester that they have. So a couple times a year, we have students come through here, and I get to talk about jockey boxes and draft systems and kind of what we do here. So I thought I'd just give Derek the camera and we'd film it. And so here you go. Here's kind of the end of the tour of our facility. We didn't catch all of it. So there's just part of that, but then the whole lecture on jockey boxes and what makes them unique and how they differ from draft systems and that kind of stuff. So anyway, without further ado, here you go.
So we try to limit it to the US, but since the internet is global, everybody tries to reach out and say, hey, can you ship us that? So that's kind of what we consider ourselves, as an e-commerce business that makes and sells jockey boxes. So we didn't start out this way. We were a home brewing manufacturing facility. We made immersion chillers, and we had kettles and home brewing hot liquor tanks and mash tuns and false bottoms, and we had a whole huge line of homebrewing stuff that we manufactured and wholesaled to a lot of the homebrewing wholesale companies across the U.S., like LD Carlson or Northern Brewer, and we still make all the Northern Brewers immersion chillers. How many of you guys have homebrewed?
That's me. Come on.
Okay, so do you guys know what an immersion chiller is? Okay. Do we have an immersion chiller?
That's what a heat exchanger is.
Yeah, it's a heat exchanger, right? And so when you're making beer and you're boiling the wort and you're adding your hop additions, at the end you need to send that wort through a heat exchanger to rapidly chill it, right? To lock in your hop profile, right? On a home brewing level, you stick a copper coil into your wort and run cold water internally through it, right? And so as the cold water runs through the copper coil, it'll suck the heat out of your wort, right? Out of your boil kettle. And so it's just a product that homebrewers used. And my business partner started making them, and he sold them on eBay. That's how this whole thing got started. Was he needed one, made one, had enough copper left over that he's like, oh, I'll just make the rest of the copper. He's like, I'll just make another one and sell it on eBay. So then he made enough money to get more copper, and then he just kept buying copper with it and selling them on eBay, and all of a sudden he was a copper immersion chiller manufacturing company out of his basement, and we wound up getting a hold of LD Carlson, and so we started making LD Northern Brewers immersion chillers. This is an old gross stainless one, but very similar. So we make these out of copper, right? And so this would be hooked up to your garden hose. So you drop this into your boil kettle, and then as the cold water runs internally through it, it'll pull the heat out of it. So that way you can pitch your yeast, right? So then you transfer it into whatever you're going to ferment in. You get it down to pitching temperature, and so you can add your yeast, right? So. So that's how we started. And then because a lot of this was 2013 maybe, that we were doing this, and one of the local breweries, Gravel Bottom, Matt, the owner of Gravel Bottom, knew that we coiled metal, and he was like, hey, can you make me a jockey box? And we were like, yes, we can. We had no idea what it was. So we ordered one, realized how crappy they were built, and we were like, oh yeah, we can do this. This is easy. It's just a cooler and a metal. We can do that. So we figured it out, made a really nice one. Matt took it to the beer festival that he was at, and everybody wanted one. They were like, oh, where did you get this nice thing? Nobody's done this. And so we just, it spread like wildfire across the brewing industry. And so we were an immersion chiller company. Now we are a jockey box company and portable draft company. And so we kind of pivoted and went that direction.
Did you get your name then from the immersion?
Yes. So Coldbreak is part of the chilling process, right? The proteins kind of clump together as that wort's chilling down really fast. When you guys brew, and if you ever brew, like this like cloudy, mucky protein buildup kind of starts happening in the wort, and it looks gross, but it eventually just kind of settles out and falls to the bottom and becomes your trub, right at the bottom of your fermenter. That is the Coldbreak process. Right, and so that's where Coldbreak came from. It has nothing to do with pouring draft beer, right? So, yeah, we can get into draft stuff. You guys want to come on over, grab a seat, and I've got some literature for you and some handouts for you. This is a little bit about us and what we do. So if you go to the first part of the book here, the draft quality manual, so when you're pouring beer, one of the biggest considerations is when you're making beer, they add the CO2 at the brewery, and they say, okay, this beer is going to be 2-point volumes of carbonation, and then they're going to keg it, and they're going to stick it in the fridge, and they're going to sell it, right? They're either going to tap it and pour it, or they're going to sell it. And so when you tap that keg in your walk-in cooler or wherever you're tapping it, that beer moves from there to wherever you're going to pour it. It gets there in typically one of two ways, and they separate into either a long draw draft system or a direct draw draft system. And if you look at the bottom of page 7, there's what looks like a standalone kind of kegerator. That is a direct draw draft system. So the tap goes directly from the keg up to the tower, and you're pouring your beer. That line length and the ID of the tubing from the keg to the faucet is precisely calculated to match that 2-point volumes of CO2 or whatever it is that beer is, in order to maintain that carbonation and keep the correct amount of pressure on that keg, right? Because they're using pressure to get the beer from the keg to the faucet, right? And if the CO2 is too high or too low, based on what that beer is, the carbonation level will change inside that keg, right? So that's called a balanced system. Typically it's 10 to 12 PSI that you need to push at. The other way is if your beer faucet is way far away from wherever you tap your kegs, that's called a long draw draft system. And they use tubing and pumps to move that beer from the keg through the tubing all the way to wherever you are, your tap system, right? How many of you guys have been in Perrin? Okay, so when you're looking at Perrin, there's this giant like L-shaped bar. Well, behind that giant L-shaped bar is their giant walk-in cooler. But they've got to go from their walk-in cooler up to the top of it, and then it like goes down somewhere, and then it goes underneath the flooring, and then it comes up through their bars. And so they've got 3 massive pouring stations. So some of it's maybe like 30 feet away, some of it's like 60 feet away, so it's very long, it's very far, right? So they have to keep that trunk line, that big pile of tubing that's all together holding every one of those beer lines, they got to keep it cold. So one way they do that is like the tubing inside of it, most of them are beer lines. Some of them are cold glycol lines that just run cold glycol through those lines. And then the beer lines around that glycol line are touching it somehow. And so it keeps the beer line cold all the way until it gets to your faucet. So it keeps it cold. So if you go to the next page, I think it's page 8. It kind of gives you, so page 8 kind of gives you an idea of what a long draw draft system is. And that top one up there shows like this giant fan that's pushing cold air through the system. So that's the other way. If they're not using glycol, if it's a short run system, they can sometimes push cold air through the system, and it'll also chill the beer and keep the beer cold. But glycol is probably the number one way that happens. Okay. So saying all of this, if you also look to the left side of those pictures, there's two tanks. There's 100% nitrogen, and then there's 100% CO2, and then those two gases go up to a blender. So when you're running a long draw draft system, those two gases are calculated along with the length of tubing that you're using. Sometimes they use pumps, sometimes they only use those two gases. They're using the blend of the gases because if I were to put 100% carbon dioxide in a long draw draft system, you're going to wind up what's called a jockey box, which means I need to put a lot of pressure onto this system to get it out of the keg, through the coils, and then out the beer. So if I'm telling you, if I'm the brewer and I'm like, listen, you should tap this at 10 PSI, I need 25 to 30 PSI to go through the jockey box to get it to come out properly. So here's where the blending comes in. They'll use either nitrogen and CO2 because nitrogen doesn't like to absorb into the beer. CO2 will absorb into the beer. Nitrogen has a hard time like getting into it. So if you've ever like drinking Guinness, or if you ever make some sort of nitro beer, what you have to do is put nitrogen on a keg at an extremely high pressure for a long time. It'll sit there for days in order for that nitrogen to absorb. So it takes a while for nitrogen to absorb. So you can use either a blend of CO2 and nitrogen, what they call beer gas. You can use some sort of blend to push beer. But okay, so all of this to say, there's different ways that you can get beer from a keg to your faucet. In a normal system, it's balanced, and it's like all of that calculation is taken into account when you're designing a system. Going back to the jockey boxes, a jockey box is a long draw draft system because there's 50 feet of coil in here that's basically condensed into a cooler, right? If I put 10 pounds of pressure on here to maintain the carbonation level, what's going to happen?
It's not going to come out.
It's not going to come out, right? Because there's resistance in those coils, right? It's just there's not going to be enough pressure for that beer to get through all that system because the tubing and the coil and like all that's putting resistance on the beer. And so you start cranking the PSI. You're like, okay, I gotta get more pressure. And so it'll like as the pressure goes up, the beer will start to dribble out, and it'll all come out foam because there's not enough pressure. So if let's say I'm at 20 PSI, that's in theory that's too much for the keg because then the beer will start to absorb it. But you got to keep going. And so we found that with a 50-foot coil, jockey boxes need 25 to 30 PSI to pour properly. If you go above that, it comes out too fast and you get foam. If you go below that, it doesn't come out fast enough and you get foam. Okay? So, and then the longer the coil you put in there, the higher the PSI. So we do make 100-foot coils. It doesn't double the PSI. It puts it 35 to 40 PSI. But when you get to 35, 40 PSI, that's a lot of pressure on a keg. Most beer couplers have a pressure relief valve on them, on the side of them. So you can actually pull, when these are tapped, you can pull the pressure and get the pressure off the keg with the relief valve. This has a safety valve on it that these are set for like 50 to 52 is when they usually go off. So 50 is pretty much the max you can put onto a keg with a standard beer coupler. And so the low pressure regulators that we use for these systems as well, they've got a relief valve on the back of them. So if once this gets to 50, 55 PSI, gas will start coming out of the back of it and saying like, hey, there's too much pressure. It'll divert the gas out that way. So. So when jockey boxes were first being built, they were made from off-the-shelf parts. Like this is just a beer faucet shank, which means that a beer faucet like here connects to the front of this is just a piece of stainless steel that's got a hole in it, right? That's what all beer faucets are faucet shanks. So when you see, if you're standing at a bar or brewery and you see this, one of these is actually inside of this. That goes to the back of it and the tubing connects back here. And so people were taking these and they were like, well, I'll just, I'll drill out the back a little bit so I can, they'll either put a tailpiece on the end of this and then connect these with tubing. Like that's the worst way to connect a coil to a shank, is if you ever open up a Jockey box and you see tubing inside of it, don't use it. Because what happens is the beer, the ID of the tubing and the coil is different, and so your beer winds up like kind of doing this inside of it, and it causes foam, right? And so we want these coils connected directly to the back of it. And so a Jockey box shank like this is different. And so all of the parts and pieces, one of the things that we did differently is all the parts and pieces that were being used were, when breweries were building their own, they were using just off-the-shelf parts and kind of modifying them. All of our parts are made specifically for Jockey boxes now. And so, like, these are all drilled out pretty deep. And so that way, when we do put the coils inside of it, like this stainless steel coil is pretty far into the shank here. And then all shanks, it's not a permanent connection. What it is a rubber grommet on the back of it, and then there's a stainless steel tailpiece that bumps up against it. And then when you tighten the hex nut on the back of it, what it does is it takes that, we call them top hats. It takes that top hat and as you tighten it down, it just kind of, it crushes that, that rubber grommet that's in there, and it holds it really nice and tight. So.
How often do you have to kind of check that connection?
We used to tell people at least yearly. If you're not, messing with it too much and everything stays relatively tight, like we'll check to make sure everything's tight before we use it all. For each event, just because depending how far you're traveling, like sometimes we're going to like Tennessee or other states, and sometimes that little bit of vibration will loosen kind of some of that stuff in there. So we just take a wrench and quickly go through it and tighten it all, just to double check before we use it. But yeah, before we came along too, a lot of these coils were off the shelf parts, and when you stretched the coil to the shank, it was always pulling away from it. And so a lot of times on the cheaper versions, like the coils will actually like pop out of those shanks. And so it's just a design difference. The other thing. That's
not, because I've been pouring at a beer fest and all of a sudden beer is coming out of the cooler.
Yeah.
And it's
yep.
because that disconnected.
Yep. And if you look close, like you come in, if you guys come up here, the coil, when we bend them, it actually, if that were to start happening, the coil would actually push away, it would start to back out of the shank, and the coil would actually hit the back of the cooler. So the coil actually can't come out of the shank unless you're actually kind of manipulating it and pulling it out. So it's pretty hard to get, on ours, it's pretty hard to get these out of the shanks unless you're manhandling it and just really like pulling on it. So
that's not, our shanks, to your point, were not designed for what it was.
Yeah.
There's the parts, go make it.
Yep, exactly. Yep. The other thing that we did differently was we didn't like it when the faucets were like really close to the cooler, especially like a lot of the breweries like to have the really large tap handles. We noticed that a lot of times when you went to shut the tap off, the handle would come or hit the back of the cooler. So we pushed them away from the cooler a little bit, and we had these extension flanges made. And so the only thing that it's doing is pushing the faucet away from the cooler a little bit. So. This is one of the ColdOnes. This is our first consumer-friendly product. Because of everything that I kind of just went over, Jockey boxes have been a tool that breweries have been using for a very long time. Catering companies use them. So if you're if you're an organization that pours beer a lot, using them, you had to have somebody that knew how to use them, right? And it was a thing that you had to teach people how to use, and it's kind of a complicated thing. And so when you try to talk to an everyday consumer that wants to pour beer at his graduation party, or if it's some sort of like family gathering or whatever it is, we tried coming up with an easy at-home solution that was a balanced system and kind of a standalone product. So that's where this kind of came. This was just a product that we wanted as drinkers. We were like, I just want something easy. I don't want to bring a keg sometimes. Sometimes I want 2 gallons. Sometimes I just want to mix a cocktail in them. Maybe I don't want beer. And so that's where the ColdOne came out. So the line length and the pressure and the regulator and like all that's kind of designed to be a balanced system where you can go ahead and just put whatever you want in there and tap it, and it will pour properly, and it will come out right. Because like Boyd likes to go to Brewing, and so they'll fill our like little 2-gallon Gregs for him. They don't mind doing it, so they'll just fill it right off the tap and fill it like a growler. And so we can have 2 gallons of beer and just throw it in the ColdOne. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
How many? You call it a Greg. How many Gregs can you pour through with that little CO2?
You can get 3.5. Is if you're just pouring, if you're not cleaning with it and not carbonating with it, you can get 3.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
Yeah, you can pour about. They're good for a quarter barrel, so you can get like 7 3/4, 7.5 gallons of out of it, basically. Yeah. The other thing that we've done differently is we put the inputs on the front. We call them the bartender edition, because when beer festivals, when breweries are using these at beer festivals, a lot of times you're walking up to the brewer or the person. So if you're the bartender, you're back there, and I'm your customer. And as I'm walking up to the cooler, like I don't want to see the mess, right? The tubing. I don't like, right? But the bartender doesn't care. Like, so this gives him a pretty good visual on when the kegs are going to run out, because he can come see it through the lines. And then I don't see any of the mess as the person behind or coming up and asking for the beer. So breweries asked for this for a really long time. And so we finally we pulled the trigger, and then this is our #1 seller, the 2-tap bartender edition for breweries, basically. And it just creates a nice clean look on this side. And then we also wrap our coolers. I think I've got one over here. Yeah. So breweries, if they want, they can brand their own. They can brand their own coolers, and so it looks nice. A lot of times when you see a Jockey box, it's like a red or blue cooler, like a crappy Coleman cooler or something that they just people want nice things. So especially if they're going to go through the trouble of making a really nice beer, right? They want it to look nice. So, and then this would just be another like smaller condensed version of a Jockey box that we can. This is about as small as you can get with a Jockey box, just because of the coils. So, questions?
I have to have a question.
I was just gonna ask.
Yeah.
This one basically like the at-home version of the 2-spout one, like the bartender version.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Is this the at-home version?
Yeah.
No, it's just a smaller, condensed version of a Jockey box.
How long? Because these one of the crappy Coleman cooler, which is the industry standard forever, you get maybe 4 or 5 hours with ice in it. How long? Yours look like far better coolers.
That's a good question. Like we get that question a lot, actually. It probably just holds a little bit more ice than your standard blue or red cooler, and so it'll last a little bit longer. But the cooler itself doesn't really function as a cooler because it's chilling whatever temperature your keg or drink is. So if this is fresh out of the cooler, your ice is going to last a lot longer. But if this is sitting at like 65 degrees, your ice is going to melt a lot faster because it's chilling your beverage, not necessarily like keeping the sun out of it. You know what I mean?
That makes sense.
Yeah. So the little sheet that I gave you this is just our quick handout, because you can put all these parts together and like put them into a refrigerator. Like you could put a beer shank into an old refrigerator, right? And then you could run the line from your shank to a keg that you bought at the store, and you're keeping your keg cold in the refrigerator. And then if you've got a beer tap, you can tap your keg and it'll go to the front of your refrigerator, right? That's called a kegerator, right? And so when you're building a kegerator, you have to know a couple you have to know a couple mathematically, like there's a formula, right? Like what's the idea of my tubing and how long does it need to be in order to take that 10 or 12 PSI from the keg and reduce it to get the proper flow. And so this is just kind of like a little cheat sheet on how to balance a kegerator. And then the big one I gave you is a Jockey box assembly. And so it kind of shows you, oh no, this is a jumper box. So a year or two ago, people kept asking us that they were like building like a mobile bar, or they were building a tap trailer, or they were building something that where they wanted to hide the Jockey box, but they wanted the beer faucets somewhere else, like on a tower. Like maybe we want to connect the tower to the front of the cooler. And so we came up with what's called a jumper box, which is basically a Jockey box, but it doesn't have the beer faucet connections on it. It's got like it would look like it had 4 rear shank connections on it. And then you would mount this faucet shank somewhere else, like through a wall, and then you would connect the jumper box to this. And so basically you didn't see that, and all you saw were the faucets. And so this would be a assembly for that. And so your CO2, your kegs to the keg lines that run up to the jumper box, that goes through the coils and then out the jumper box to what we call shank jumpers. And then it connects to your faucet shanks, which are mounted somewhere else. And then the other side would be if you wanted to do it to a tower. Right, so if you're building like a bar outside, you wanted to hook a tower to it. So.
It's really cool, because yeah, like you said, like a trailer, you don't necessarily have to refrigerate the trailer if you have the ice and the keg.
Correct, yeah.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
What happens when you chill a keg down too quickly?
Too quickly? I don't know. That's a good question.
It says 25 hours for starting at 50 degrees here. Just curious.
I think what that's highlighting is if you were to pull a keg from a refrigerator or a walk-in cooler, if you put it in the sun, it'll warm up very rapidly. Let's say it warmed up 10 degrees, went from 39 to 49, right? And then you were like, oh, well, I'm gonna tap this, but I need it cold, or I'm gonna put it back in the refrigerator. If you wanted to get it back down to 39 degrees just by the cooler itself, that can take 24 to 48 hours for that keg itself to like kind of go back that 10 degrees. That's kind of where the why and the Jockey boxes are a thing, right? Because it'll take that 49 degree keg in the coil, as it goes through the coil, because you filled it, it's full of ice, it'll knock that 10 degrees out. And so on the temperature testing that we've done, we can take a 70 degree keg with a 50-foot coil. You can open the beer faucet and pour 4 16-ounce beers, and they're only like 4 degrees difference. And so that was one after another. But if you pause at any point, you pour the beer, let's say you hand the beer over and you say thank you. You say like, okay, what do you need? And then you go grab your cup, and then you go back, and then you pour another 16-ounce beer, that beer and this beer is the same temperature. You can do that over and over and over again. And so a 50-foot coil is like that sweet spot from chilling power to PSI and unbalanced pressure needed to get through the system. It's kind of like that Goldilocks zone. So.
Yeah, that's all. Like, I love. That's a great explanation of why is it 50 feet.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then there's a way that people will put another piece of equipment that people will put into a jockey box, and it's called a plate chiller, which is basically like a giant aluminum block that's got stainless steel tubing in it. That plate chiller only has, like, when I've looked them up, they have anywhere from like 8 to 11 feet of stainless steel, and so, or 8 to 15 feet or whatever it is. And so there's only 3 or 4 ounces of liquid getting cold at a time in a plate chiller. And so, like, that's not enough. Like, if you're pouring samples, yeah, you might be okay. So if you're only pouring 2 or 3 ounces of beer at a time at an event where you're just giving samples out, plate chiller might work really well. But if you're pouring anything more than that, like a 50-foot coil holds a 50-foot, quarter-inch internal diameter ID tubing holds 17 ounces of liquid. So you will always have a pint of beer available to pour. And so that's another kind of reason why it's like, okay, you can get a full pint out of it. So.
How long do they last before you have to replace parts?
Because we make everything out of stainless steel, there's two, if you were to buy a beer shank today and you looked it up online, there's 2 versions that you would find. One, 100% stainless steel. The other one is chrome plated brass. They look similar. One of them is a brass core that's just got chrome plating on it. That's a cheap version. If you're buying a jockey box that's got chrome plated brass inside of it, that chrome plating eventually wears down and it exposes the brass. And then anytime beer or any beverage runs through it, it gets a metallic flavor because it's touching brass as it's going through. So cheap versions have a expiration date. Stainless steel version, like there's no brass in this building. Like, we're very intentional about it. Everything that we make is stainless steel. So the parts and pieces will last forever if you buy them. What gets damaged is the cooler itself. Because they're just coolers that are designed to be, put stuff in it and then keep stuff cold. Like, we're heavily modifying the coolers, right? And they're getting thrown in trucks and cars and vans, and they're being hit and moved, and like beer's going through them. So beer is alive, right? There's always yeast in it. And so there's, there's chances for mold to grow everywhere. And if you use your jockey box, dump the ice, and then leave the lid on, if you don't pull your drain out, like that one's got the drain plug out, so it can breathe a little bit, like you'll have mold, very quickly. And so it depends on how well you take care of it. We have local breweries that still have, like Cedar Springs Brewing Company has one of our original jockey boxes that we made and that we wrapped. They're still pouring out of it. Looks brand new. I won't name the other one, but there's other breweries around in the area where it's almost like every 3 or 4 months they'll come back and be like, hey, we need a new cooler because like the cooler's damaged and it's scratched and it's like rusting and they just don't take care of it, right? And so it really depends on internal policies and how the stuff is treated. So anyway, we can take the guts out because it's all made of stainless steel. We can take the guts out and just put it into a new cooler. So cooler is what's really that needs to be replaced a lot. So, and then the tubing's got a shelf life too. We like using clear. There's always the risk of light strike when you're using clear tubing outside. The clear tubing, I can see immediately if it's not clean, right? So if I don't clean it well enough and I go to use it the next time, like I know and I can see the like mold growth, and time for new tubing, time for new tubing and time for a thorough cleaning. That's why we like the clear tubing, is just because it's a visual representation of how well it was treated and cared for the last time it was used. And there's this is what we do all day long, and there's no guarantee that I didn't forget that because we did an event somewhere that I didn't come back and forget to clean the jockey box, right? It happens everywhere, it happens all the time, no matter how good and clean you are, eventually you're gonna forget that you didn't clean it. And if you run beer through it, it's like a day or two before that beer goes rancid and it gets pretty nasty. But luckily everything's made out of stainless steel and it's easily cleaned, but yeah, I've seen some pretty shoddy built jockey boxes in our day at beer festivals, and yeah, you'd be surprised what people pour out of.
I used to go to a beer festival in Boulder, and there was a guy locally who is a brewer and started his own draft system, and he called himself the Keg Whisperer. And he would look at everybody's jockey box, and he's a nice enough guy, but he was like, yeah, yours is dumb because of this, yours is awful because of this. And so one time I did build a jockey box that I put some effort into, and he's like, oh, you did that, oh, and like finally Paul was accepting of one jockey box, so it's all good about that.
That's good.
But it was a nice sort, because he would actually then have all the parts and pieces. He's like, oh, you're going to need this. And so he would kind of rebuild jockey boxes, like the tubing and whatnot on site.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we used to all carry backpacks for the Michigan Brewers Guild festivals. We're pretty close to all the Michigan breweries. I mean, we sell nationally, and we go to a lot of the national festivals and stuff like that. And like, we like to sponsor hospitality to like the area that the brewers like to go to and hang out during the beer festivals and stuff like that. And we'll get to chat with them and stuff like that. So, but we all used to carry backpacks, any festival that we'd go to that just had extra parts and pieces, and we could rebuild something if needed. And because, you know, not everybody carries all that kind of stuff. And yeah, sometimes it's just one little piece that you need. And if you don't have it, the jockey box doesn't work. So like there's a beer washer between each connection, like from the clear tubing to the jockey box and the clear tubing to the beer coupler. Like there's a small rubber gasket that goes in there, and if you don't have those, it's gonna leak. So. What else you guys got?
Yeah.
Is that the biggest you guys have, or?
No, we just shipped a 6-tap roto-molded cooler yesterday. That went out yesterday, right?
Yeah.
I think your website said you got an 8-tap.
We do have an 8-tap. Yep. So one of the first ones that we built for Gravel Bottom, that it was an 8-tap, and so that's the one that kind of kicked it off. What's that?
Because that stainless one's a 54 quart cooler. And
Yeah.
that was like a 108 or something.
That one was a 150. It was a 150 quart cooler. Yeah. The one we shipped yesterday was a 110 quart cooler. But so we can put 4 taps. We can basically put 200 feet of tubing into a 54 quart cooler. So 2 100-foot coils or 4 50-foot coils. 50 foot's the normal. Sometimes people just want the extra. So this is our most popular. Our second most popular is a 4-tap, and then that's as much as we put into a 54 quart cooler. But we do have larger coolers that we can put 8 to. I think we max out at 10. But anything beyond 4, like even 4, you need. Like you kind of need 2 people to move around. But if I were to fill this with ice and set it up, like this thing weighs almost 50 pounds dry, and then you start adding 30 pounds of ice, 40 pounds of ice to it, like, you know, they're 80, 90 pounds sitting here. So they get very heavy. And so going more than 4 taps, I usually tell people, listen, if you want 8, get 2 4s. Like I can build them. If that's what you want, we can build it, but I would recommend 2 4s versus an 8. So.
Yeah, how would you empty the ice on an 8?
With 2 or 3 people.
Oh, okay.
Like it takes 2 people to dump these without damaging it. You know, because you got to hold the lid open and you got to tip it up, and they're a pain. So, and they're messy. Like there's nothing clean about pouring beer in a remote environment. Like it is a mess from start to finish. So. This
I
one?
want one of those on the pontoon boat.
Yes, that is exactly where you want it. Yeah. Say that again?
So that's what my husband said when he seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got me one of those for my fishing trip.
Yes.
Yeah, so we quietly launched these last year. We had enough to build like 4 or 5 of them. And we built it, and Boyd used it. I'm like, I love this thing. This thing's amazing. Got it really dialed in. And then so we just quietly threw it up on our website. And then he made a video. I don't know if it was Instagram or TikTok, but that went viral. And so we turned it to pre-sale or pre-order because we're we can't fulfill all of these. We gotta turn it off. And so we did that like 3 or 4 times because every time we turned it on, like it would sell out. And then so 2024 was we were always playing catch up and building these. So, but now like it's just now gotten to the point where we have like, I think we have like 300 or 400 in stock, and we can like, all right, now we can start doing this again and we can sell them. So.
Do they come with the keg?
Yeah.
The Gregs?
Yep.
That's
Yep.
awesome.
Yeah, they come with everything. The CO2, basically you can pull it out of the box, put the lid on, fill it with whatever you want, and then go pour. Like it's perfect for a little party, family gathering, dinner party, pontoon boat, Yeah.
How do you clean the coils?
With a keg, you can we have a hand pump that connects to the beer coupler. So you can either hand pump it and just send some cleaner through it. Otherwise, you can use the little Greg. You can put a cleaning solution into it and then just tap it like you would a keg. So.
Also, is there like an ideal diameter for the coil?
It has to do. We have specific cleaning kegs as well. And so these have Sankey D connections on them, and then it's got a lid that's easily removable and easily, you can fill. So these work well for like the 4 taps. But if you just have a 1 tap or 2 tap, sometimes our little hand pump works well too. So the diameter, like it, what's that?
That's the white thing.
Yes. Yep. It's right here. Yeah, so we have these little coupler attachments made, and so then you just pressurize it and hit the trigger and open your tap, and it'll send cleaner through the system. The idea of you can go larger, like you could go 3/16, and then you could. I think if you went down to 3/16 ID, it would be too much pressure because the lower you go, the more resistance there is, and so you would need more pressure. But if you went the opposite way, if you went like 3/8, now you're talking about the heat transfer, the temperature transfer between the ice and the beverage itself. And so, yes, there is like this ideal zone where there's enough liquid inside that's being chilled, but not too much where it can get adequately chilled. So yes, there is and pressure and resistance related, yes, I would say.
And one of the important things for the non-brewing people is warm beer pours foamy.
Yes.
And so that's where it's always nice to have a cold beer, but it's critically important that the beer stays cold while being poured.
Yes. And how many of you guys are 21 here? Okay. Have you guys been to Burning Foot, the beer festival in Muskegon? Okay. That's one of the bigger, better beer festivals across the country. And a lot of times what will happen is people will, like the facility will, organizers will send the beer out to the breweries, and then they'll set them in the sun, or they'll warm up really quickly, right? And so as the beer starts to warm up, the CO2 is like, I don't like this. I need to get out of here. And it doesn't want to stay in suspension. And so you'll see it in the beer lines actually. As the beer warms up, bubbles, like the CO2 will start to come out of it, and the whole like line looks like it's moving, even though you haven't poured anything. That CO2 is running through the system because it doesn't want to be in there. And so it's a visual representation of it before it even gets to the beer faucet. So You want beer to stay cold, and you want the Jockey box to knock out the remaining temperature that it has warmed up a little bit, so you don't necessarily need to chill it, but you need to keep it out of the sunlight, and you just need to keep it from warming up too much.
Yeah, that's got to be about the toughest environment to pour it.
Yes, yeah, and that's kind of why I brought it up. On the beach in Muskegon, in the mid August, like sun's beating down on it, the sand's warm, and like it's hard to keep beer cold at that point. So, and there's sand everywhere, and like it's a mess.
It's a really fun festival.
It's fun.
If you're not working.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Drink early.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions? Well, we definitely thank you guys for your time.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the Jockey boxes. All these little things that you guys do are amazing. That kind of that bar that you have that goes across.
Yeah.
The shanks. That is
Yep.
awesome. The detail where the compression fitting can't go backwards. That is.
Yeah, it's been a labor of love for us. It's been hard watching people copy us because they're all trying to catch up to us. And if you look online, you'll see some Jockey boxes that are similar to ours. But like, I was just talking about this the other day on a video. I'm like, yeah, somebody will put the plate on there, but they don't know why they're doing it. They're just like, oh, Coldbreak's doing that, so we'll put a plate on it too, so it looks like theirs, but we don't really know why we're doing it. Right? There's no intentionality or thought behind it, and they're just copying a product, right? Where we're like, okay, how can we make this better? Because this is what we do, right? This is our thing. So, yeah.
And those extenders.
Yeah, that is
genius.
Well, nobody's doing it yet, so like I can tell immediately from a distance, like if it's our Jockey box or not because of the extension flanges. So it's a pretty good visual. Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing where the long handle doesn't go back all the way, and
Yeah.
you just get like beer dripping out your faucet the whole time. So then you take the handle off, and it doesn't look as nice. And so yeah, that is.
There's a cider conference called CiderCon. Somebody was pouring out of a beer trailer. They were pouring a bunch of cider, and I saw that happen because as they opened the tap and they were pouring cider out of it, and the tap handle had moved just slightly, and then they went to turn it back off. Because the tap handle had moved, they couldn't turn the beer faucet off, and they were like cider was just going everywhere because they couldn't figure out how to do it. And I was like, oh, they need extension flanges. Yeah.
Every beer trailer in the world needs those.
They do. Yep. They do.
I hope the distributors are buying them from you and they convert over.
They're not, but I don't know. It's our thing, so I don't care. Like, so anything else, guys? That's all I got.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. If you guys, if you ever have any questions, draft beer or e-commerce related, you guys can always drop us a line. We're here, local. So.
Cool. Well, thanks for making the beer taste better at all the festivals.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.